Hello, everyone. This is Kamesh Pemaraju from Platform 9, and I welcome you all to our webinar on how you can save 50% over your legacy virtualization provider. We have some exciting new products that we are going to talk about, and we have a couple of exciting attendees as well as speakers here. Many of you already know Peter Frey. He's been our mainstay speaker for many webinars in the past. So why don't we just get started with some introductions here? Nate, why don't you get started with a quick intro?
Sure. I'm definitely the newest here, 2 months at Platform 9. Had a 23-year career in open source Linux, OpenStack, and Kubernetes, among others. Early on, I was a developer. I've been in solution architect roles and for the last decade plus in sales. So that's my background. I'm steeped in this stuff.
All right, Nate, welcome to the webinar. And Peter, of course, many of you may be familiar with. If you're new, Peter, why don't you talk about your journey?
Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Frey. I'm the field CTO here at Platform 9 Systems. I've almost been here about 5.5 years now. So I'm in my 6th year of being here. I present to you from Florida today. I manage our pre-sales, solutions engineering, and our field engineering teams, which is kind of a nice perspective because I really get to see our customers' journey as they move from a prospect through becoming customer and some of the results that they see. And I get to talk to a lot of different people about what's going on in the market, and I hear a lot of different market trends. So I'm excited to talk about VMware today.
Yep, welcome, Peter. And Peter's been here for a long time. I think I just joined right after you did, Peter, just a few months later. I've been here 5 years too. I've been running marketing, product marketing, a bunch of other things. So I'll be your host and moderator for today. And why don't we just dive straight in? But before we do that, we have some exciting prizes for the webinar. If you stay through the end of the webinar, ask questions, you will receive a JBL Go-To speaker. This has been a very popular gift, by the way. We have been at various events like KubeCon, etc., and these just go off the shelves. People just love them. And the one on the right is pretty exciting too. It's a pretty sophisticated JBL speaker. So stay to the end of the webinar. You will be entered into a draw and you could win a JBL Pulse 4. So with that, let's get into the agenda. Today, we're going to talk about VMware, right? A lot of you are probably aware of what's happening in the market around VMware's acquisition by Broadcom. We're hearing a lot from analysts and from our own customers and prospects about the concerns and implications of what this could mean for them. So we'll dive into that a little bit, talk about what we are hearing. And then people are thinking about alternatives to VMware. Where do we go from here? What are the things that they can use? And we'll talk through some of the things we hear about the popular alternatives, the most common ones, and some of the pros and cons associated with those decisions. And then we will talk about this new technology, which you may or may not have heard about. It's called KubeVirt, and it's a good alternative to VMware. And we'll talk about why that is so. And then we will talk about Platform 9 and our architecture around KubeVirt and Kubernetes, and talk through, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about business outcomes. What is your cost? What is your ROI? What does it take to get into a production with a new platform? What are the risks involved? And we'll go through all of that. And our speakers here today have tons of experience with this. They work with customers all day long, and they know what's happening out there. So we'll jump into Q&A towards the end. This is a Zoom webinar, so most of you are familiar with how to ask questions. So raise a question along the way. I will look at them, and if we can certainly do Q&A towards the end, but if you want to ask questions along the way, please feel free to do so. With that, I'm going to jump straight into the conversation here. Peter and Nate, take it away.
Great. I'll jump in first, and then Nate, you can take it home. What's interesting for me is like I said, I get to talk to our customers, right? A lot of our customers use our Platform 9 managed Kubernetes offering. but they're also using VMware. And, we've become a trusted advisor to a lot of our customers, and they're really bringing some interesting comments to me about, what's going on with Broadcom, and they've asked my opinion on these kind of things, right? And kind of the stuff that I'm hearing is wrapped around pricing uncertainty, right? There seems to be, with this acquisition, a fear out there that our pricing is going to change, it's going to increase, right? And then if it does increase, are they going to continue to innovate with our products, right? Their products, I should say. And how does that fit into Broadcom's greater portfolio and strategy as a company? And so I think there's a lot of concern from our customers, and probably the biggest one I hear, and Nate, maybe you have some comments on this too, but is support and customer service, right? We've seen with other acquisitions out there in the industry, the first thing that happens in when a company gets acquired is support services start to dwindle, and they don't get the same level of support that they used to. And, so I'm hearing this a lot, and customers are coming to me and asking me about what alternatives they have. And that's why we thought this would be a great idea to position this webinar to talk to you about what those alternatives are. Nate, any thoughts?
Yeah, just chaining off the support mention that you had, and a few other thoughts as well. But what I've, the Forrester mention goes directly to that point. Generally, the mode for Broadcom in the past has been to focus on the top 600 or so customers and really work directly with them, and then the rest goes down into the channel. I would expect we'd see that same pattern again. Incidentally, I've had a lot of channel partners come to me who resell VMware currently, and they've shared that their customers are asking them for what alternatives they have, and they're searching for what they can recommend to them. A lot of them have said they've been in a little bit of knockdown, drag out negotiations where they're kind of stuck in the middle too, trying to help their customers. So it's a concern, not just for the end customers, but the whole partner and channel community that's associated with this too.
Right. So there are concerns. The question is, what are the alternatives? So we have a few alternatives that we hear from our customers all the time. So why don't we kind of dive into each of these alternatives and talk through the pros and cons and what you see, Peter, especially because when you talk to customers, they say, hey, we want to just stay with VMware, right? Or move to another virtualization provider. And public cloud is almost always in the conversation. So why don't you kind of walk through the pros and cons for each of these approaches?
Yeah, I think there's the stay with what you've got, stay with the with VMware and ride it out. That's always an option. I think a lot of customers consider that, but then they get the bill and they go, man, do we really want to do this? Yeah. Right. Then, I hear a lot of customers thinking about, well, if we're not going to do this, maybe we should do a cloud first adoption and start moving VMs from our VMware infrastructure to a cloud provider. Well, that's interesting. I think what some of our customers have told me is that once they started moving things to the cloud, and that's kind of a known path, the cost of the cloud can be exponentially more than their private data centers, right? One of our customers mentioned that the cost of cloud was 4x the cost of what they paid across 4 data centers, and what they were for electric, cooling, for space, for all the licenses and everything. So that doesn't seem to be a super viable option. And I see people going to the cloud, and I see people moving back from the cloud. And then I see a lot of hybrid cloud where they have the on-prem data centers and things like that, right? And then switching to a legacy virtualization provider, a different one, there's things that, there's OpenStack, there's Hyper-V, right? And I think if you look at Hyper-V, can be a challenge because, then you maybe moving from a VMware proprietary interface to a Windows-based proprietary interface. And do you have those skill sets? Do you want to train that way? Does it make sense to go down a path that isn't necessarily forward looking, right? And so, an OpenStack, it's a great offering. It's KVM based. It allows you to migrate pretty effectively from one to another, from VMware or any other source to OpenStack. And it's a mature product, but it's not seeing, and I would say it's probably a grandfathered product, open source project. And it's doing what it does, and there are millions of people using it, right? But there are other options, and so we'll talk about some of those first.
Nate,
Yeah.
do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that just about all of these alternatives that we're talking about keep you locked in. So you are trading one proprietary vendor for another, and you're basically handing your, I guess, the keys to your future. You're tying yourself to a vendor. None of these present a path where you have a choice of vendors, where you have the choice to, leverage open source projects. And we'll get into more of that with the, I guess, the fourth alternative that we'll discuss here. But yeah, if you're going to contemplate changing to another platform, choose one that gives you control over your own destiny.
Right. One quick thought here. We are talking about existing VMware customers who probably have a large footprint of virtual machines, right? Maybe hundreds, maybe even thousands. So if they go to a public cloud, Peter, essentially what they want to do is take those VMs, lift and shift, throw them into a public cloud, just focusing on that public cloud aspect for a second. They're not going to get much benefit. Cost, of course, is going to be more, but are they going to get any benefits of a public cloud just by moving them over there? What are your thoughts on that?
So, yeah, I think that they'll probably get the benefits of quick and easy infrastructure stand up, the infrastructure as a service, that sort of thing. And then, what we're seeing is it's really hard to migrate away from the cloud once you're kind of locked into that. And I truly think that the cost is one of the things that is really surprising to folks.
Right.
Not only are you paying for EC2 instances, and not only are you paying for every EBS volume that you're using and components like that, but you're also paying for all your networking ingress. And I think that's a real shocker there.
And there's a big movement towards multi-cloud and of course hybrid, as you mentioned earlier. And it's for the very reason that Nate was just saying. You don't want to be locked into one vendor. Yeah, you want multiple options, right? So that's another thing. So let's talk about what is the fourth alternative, I guess. And we'll get into this in a little bit. KubeVirt, for those of you who have not heard of it. Peter, what is KubeVirt and why should people care?
Yeah, KubeVirt is a really interesting open source project. It also happens to be supported by Platform 9. But so what we're seeing in the industry is a huge trend for everybody to want to move to containerization. And they're implementing, instead of a hypervisor, they're implementing Kubernetes. And that allows them to deploy and manage containers, which is great. Gets a higher density workloads, lots of benefits there to doing that. But then they soon discover that there are these legacy virtual machines that have been around for years. It's got a lot of technical debt. The developer quit 7 years ago, right? And they just don't want to refactor that. It doesn't make business sense for them to refactor that, but they still need to leverage that application, right? And so as they're looking at migrating other applications to containers, KubeVirt is a great option for allowing you to take that VM, move it away from VMware, doing an export and importing it directly into KubeVirt. And now you're running in that same Kubernetes infrastructure all of your legacy virtual machines, right? And if you look at it from a little bit of the technology side of things, right? KubeVirt leverages KVM. KVM is a known hypervisor standard. It's used by OpenStack and many others, right? And so the processes for migrating VMs is very easy. In fact, it's built in to KubeVirt. So we can take a VM and we can migrate a VM over, from a source, VMware or other, and import it into KubeVirt very easily, right? So I think this is kind of the best of both worlds, and it's very future-proof. It has benefits for your end users, for your engineers, right? Because Kubernetes is kind of the new Silicon Valley shiny object out there. Everybody wants to learn about it. They want to get their hands on. They want to play with Kubernetes, right? So those VMware administrators are now excited to look at a new technology and get some hands on something new.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, still being able to support their virtualization efforts.
Right, right. So there's a question here, which is interesting because we just talked about the alternative earlier. VMware vSphere latest release version supports and leverages Kubernetes features, combining virtual machines and containers. So what's the main motive for migrating to any other alternative or vendor? I think you kind of touched upon this earlier, but you might want to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, so the difference there is a kind of a paradigm shift, right? Where VMware is going to run VMs and it's going to run Kubernetes inside of that, right? And I believe that the future for most greenfield applications is going to be in a containerized environment, right? And that the legacy will be virtual machines. Now, I can make an argument both ways for virtual machines and containers, but I believe that, running Kubernetes as the base layer and supporting your virtual machines inside of Kubernetes is probably the future where things are going, rather than doing it the other way around, because then you're just leveraging virtual machines to support containerization. And I think what you want to do is get that higher workload density of applications with containers and virtual machines right at the native OS kind of level. So I almost think of Kubernetes as your operating system. Might be a little bit of a stretch, but that's kind of where I
Very interesting. So I think there's one point you made there, Peter. VMware basically is using virtual machines as the base, right? That's kind of their bread and butter, vSphere, hypervisor, all of that. And which means that essentially you're running footprint heavy VMs as your base, right? And that's the key point here. So if you want to leverage Kubernetes at its base layer, bare metal, you're going to be saving a ton of compute capacity. And we'll get to that later on when we talk about TCO. So anything you want to add there, Nate, in terms of costs, right? I think that's the other piece that need to be.
Yeah, I mean, if we're kind of the second half of the answer that Peter provided, right? Like, yeah, you can achieve similar outcomes, but are you on a kind of a forward-looking modern platform? And then also you're coming back to what your licensing costs are there. And if you're doing Tanzu on top of VMware, that's another line item, plus all kinds of additional things that you can purchase around that. So that's one thing. I do want to pivot back a little bit to the underpinnings of KubeVirt. You see on that first bullet, it leverages KVM. KVM as an open source project has been out since 2006. It was integrated into the mainline Linux kernel in 2007. So this thing's been around for a long time. It's the underpinnings for EC2 in AWS. It also is the underpinnings for GCP's cloud environment. Huge enterprises use KVM. It's enterprise grade, it's battle tested. Enterprises like Boeing, Best Buy, Walmart. So known names out there, known brands that are getting a lot of value out of it. The other thing that I'll share is I think when people hear the word Kubernetes or are contemplating adopting it, it probably feels like a pretty big lift when you're on the front end of your journey and you go, oh, wow, for me to leverage it, I've got to refactor some apps, I got to decompose some monoliths, and I got to do all that before I can even achieve some value out of the platform. If you're running KubeVirt on your Kubernetes platform, you can immediately start to leverage the benefits of Kubernetes by running your VMs as they are. And then you can chart how rapidly, or if at all, you want to start decomposing those VMs, turn them into microservices and get the better density on the platform too in the process.
Right. Awesome. So KubeVirt is open source. It's CNCF. People might say, hey, if I have the skills, I can just take the open source stuff and run it myself. But we know how hard that can be if you don't have the skills. So I think this is a good time to kind of pivot to what Platform 9 does and how we can help you adopt and make KubeVirt and Kubernetes easy to consume. Peter?
Whoops, I was talking to mute.
Yeah.
Hey, yep, looking forward to it. Platform 9 is managed Kubernetes, right? It's a managed service around Kubernetes. We provide a cloud management plane that is your API, your user interface for creating and maintaining the lifecycle of Kubernetes clusters, right? In the diagram here, I'm showing a 3-node Kubernetes cluster, server 1, 2, and 3, right? There's an operating system sitting underneath that, Red Hat or Ubuntu. On top of that rides Kubernetes, right? And then inside of Kubernetes, we deploy the KubeVirt operator, and that allows us to, in the diagram, you can see where there's C's in there. Those are container workloads. Where you see VM, that's a virtual machine workload. And we can allow those to ride side by side in the same architecture, right, at the most efficient way that you can, right? So giving you the most dense workload to server capacity that's available, right? Our platform takes care of the whole life cycle of managing that Kubernetes cluster, from deployment to day 2 operations and upgrades and things along those lines. We also have SLAs around the support of these clusters. So anything that we deploy, which is that entire Kubernetes KubeVirt infrastructure over there on the right, we manage, right? We also monitor it for availability. And if any of it breaks, we're going to immediately get an alert or an alarm for that. And then we can share those alerts and alarms directly back with you at the same time in real time. There are hundreds of events that come out of this, but there are about 57 of them that we've identified as ultra actionable that we need to look at immediately, because this could be a sub-zero type event, and we want to triage that immediately. So what that means is we can engage, we get an alert alarm, worker node down. That's obviously impacting to your environment. And, we'll engage our support team. We will engage our incident manager, a cloud support engineer, a solutions architect, and engineering resources as needed. And this is a big differentiator for Platform 9. This level of service that you're going to get in keeping your Kubernetes clusters alive and maintained at all costs is really important. So we'll troubleshoot that. We'll resolve it as quickly as possible, get that cluster back online. In the meantime, when this sort of thing happens, right, what will happen to your VMs and your containers is they will migrate themselves and get rescheduled to the other available. If server 3 in this diagram goes down, those virtual machines will get rescheduled onto the other nodes inside the Kubernetes cluster. So your apps will continue to run as needed.
Right. The other quick thing is this is all unified, right? You're getting VM management, container management, monitoring, even bare metal provisioning, and a lot of those things in one single unified platform, versus VMware or any other solution you might have. You may have to buy multiple products, multiple licenses, multiple costs. Maybe Nate, you can add a few more things to that thought.
Well, you had me, I was thinking along another line here. Of course, you want to look at, what are all the things you're going to potentially adopt when you're looking at a primary platform for your environment. One of the things that I wanted to highlight too, we keep coming back to the lock-in point. We, in addition to obviously having KubeVirt available on our platform, there's the multi-cloud angle as well. You can import and manage non-Platform 9 Kubernetes as well. So for example, EKS and AKS. So this can be a platform that gives you that visibility and management that is truly multi-platform at the same time. And that's one more way to free yourself from being tied to one vendor.
Right. Terrific. I guess now let's talk a little bit about the cost, right? So this is the whole point of this webinar, was why should you even care migrating off of your legacy stuff? And it really comes down to cost in one way or the other. And there's a modernization benefit. But in today's economy with high interest rates and tightening of budgets, et cetera, across the board, this is going to be an important discussion at the CIO level, at the board level. So let's talk through what's the benefit from a cost perspective. Peter, you want to take that, or Nate?
Nate, why don't you jump in and kick this off?
Okay, cool. Well, just to give you some background on how we put together this TCO analysis, and we've shared just some of the high level bullets on the left-hand side. We took a sample VMware environment with 100 ESX hypervisors. Generally, you're going to get density, depending on the workloads in that environment, of 2,000 to 3,000. It could be very different based on what you have, right? But what we wanted to do was get the general use case out there, both the footprint and then the number of administrators required to maintain and operate this environment, right? So what we did was basically chart what the VMware costs would be over a 5-year period, factoring in some growth in the process, just as is going to happen naturally as your workload footprint increases. And then we factored in those same costs, the same level of growth with Platform 9 and KubeVirt as well. So this graph that you see down in the lower corner, that's what represents this. And what we're doing, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but what we're able to do is ingest whatever numbers of another environment. Let's say you've got 50, or let's say you've got 200, we can chart out a similar graph. But I think you'll see the numbers be very similar in terms of percentages and scale there, right? So you see the numbers on the right. What we've charted out was a 49% TCO reduction. This includes both the operations cost and the licensing cost that's there. Because of the model that our environment works, where we have that cloud-based management plane that lifts a lot of the ops burdens off of your administrators, we were able to see in this scenario the number of FTEs go from 4 to 1, and obviously that frees up time and allows these FTEs to focus on more value-added things for your company. And then we talked a little bit about the unified platform, about how you can run VMs and containers. Generally, you can get more density out of KubeVirt and KVM, but then also you get the benefit as you start to refactor your applications and turn some of those VM monoliths into microservices, into containers. You're going to get generally about 4x density with those services too, right? So you can see over time, you're getting benefits in each one of these areas: licensing, ops, density, and that kind of virtuous cycle just carries forward as you adopt and start leveraging the platform more. Peter, do you have some mentions around this as well?
Yeah, the one thing I was really thinking about is, you mentioned a reduction of 4 to 1 FTE, right? I like to think of that a slightly different focus, right? What could your 4 FTEs do with 75% more time, right? Allowing them to focus on delivering better service, helping developing CI/CD pipelines, things that are higher value than maintaining and running a VMware environment. That's one of the things that I think is real important. And that density thing, right? Running containers alongside of VMs, you will get a much, much higher density of workloads than you could with a virtual machine. So if you think about it this way, right? If and I'm going to use some big numbers here, and then we can adjust them for yourselves. But if every operating system required a half a gig of RAM, right, and you had 1,000 VMs, you can multiply that out right? And with containers, now you're not going to have that. So now you're reducing your footprint just on a RAM perspective exponentially by moving from virtual machines to containers, and having an environment that can do both is critical. So your workload density will go much higher, right? It could even, and that's where this 10% less compute comes in, and allowing you to shrink that environment or repurpose those servers for different tasks.
I think just one other mention, the other side of the coin, and Kamesh, you mentioned this earlier, you got some VMs that were probably built upwards of 10 years ago in your environment. The guy who built them left. You basically just have to run them until they die. You can do this on that platform, you can do that on this platform as well. So we talk all about these things around refactoring and leveraging the benefits of containers. Yeah, get after that. You're going to benefit a lot from doing that, but sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze. You can just let VMs kind of run till their natural end as well, and this platform perfectly does that.
Right. So let's talk about what it takes, right? I'm pretty sure people are thinking, wow, it's a new platform. There are lots of things to do. I have to move them over to migrate my stuff. What does it take? How long does it take? What are the risks involved, and how can Platform 9 help?
Sure. Nate, you want me to jump in on this one?
Yeah, go ahead and lead out, and I'm sure I'll have some color commentary.
Sounds great. So we have this process where we like to do, take one of these total cost of ownerships or return on investments with your inputs and your data and your analysis and your environment, and really come up to an ROI or total cost of ownership that makes sense for your company, right? We can do this with a few simple sets of inputs, and once we have that, we can talk to you about it. And then we can even take it to a level 2 or level 3 ROI with greater input and details from you and your teams, right? As we work closer together, right? So what we like to, as an offer to everybody here on this webinar, we'd like to do a total cost of analysis of your VMware environment and what it might look like with Platform 9, right? Then what we do is we'll move into an architecture workshop, a design session, and we can architect what a alternative solution might look like in your environment, and talk to you about how you could actually migrate to a new solution with the least amount of challenges, issues, pains, etc., right? And the quickest turnaround on that. From there, right, assuming that you remain highly interested, we could do a proof of concept where we'll actually deploy this in your environment. We'll take a few servers, we'll deploy it, we'll migrate VMs, and you'll see how simple this is, and how you can modernize that VMware infrastructure. And then of course we can roll out into production, and then we can help you redo that total cost of ownership after you're starting to see some of the savings, and we can look at it again after the fact. Nate?
Yeah, I think a few of the things that are important to point out here, right, is going back to the big lift. What we do is basically make that lift as easy as possible for you and make the steps very straightforward to get to that 50% savings on the other side and really accelerate your journey. Another thing I'll mention on that initial inputs, this is a nominal amount of time where we just asked for probably 4 or 5 data points, turn around a high level back of napkin type of TCO analysis. And then as part of that architecture workshop that Peter mentioned, we'd be able to dial that in a few steps further by gathering a few more data points for you, right? And this is something that will be executive level plus the details. This is something that you can provide to others in your organization, right? And help you make the business case to move to an alternative platform to start leveraging KubeVirt. I don't know if either you have any other comments. I do see we have a question.
Yeah, there are a few other questions here. I think we're kind of getting to the Q&A session here. Oh yeah, we are. But before we do that, why don't you just talk about this offer? Peter already mentioned this, but we're going to help you with VM migration and TCO. So that's the link right there. You can go to platform9.com/talk-to-our-experts and book a meeting with Nate and our experts, and we'll help you with a customized TCO analysis for your own situation, as Peter mentioned. Every situation is different, right? Your environment is going to be different, unique, and we'll use our model to figure out if this makes sense for you, right? And that brings us to the question and answer session. Actually, let me remind you once again that we have ask questions and you'll get one of these JBL go-to speakers. Every question will get one of these. And the only constraint is that you have to be in the US. The US residency will ship it to you. And all of you that have attended this webinar live will be entered into a draw to win that cool looking JBL speaker on the right. So bring those questions on. I can see one question already here. Is this approach practical for someone who uses only VMs?
Short answer is yes. I'm sure Peter will want to expand a little bit on that.
Yeah. So if you only have a virtualized environment, right, I think is worth considering an alternative, considering what's happening with the Broadcom acquisition. And it's not just me saying that, because I'm hearing that from a lot of people that I talk to, right? If you only run VMs, let me give you an example, right? I had this one customer of ours that is running VMs in a legacy system, and that legacy system, they were running an appliance. This particular appliance was a firewall, and they were getting a throughput in and out of that of about 2 gig per second. And they needed to have a much higher throughput for, this is a network operator and they provided network services. They moved to KubeVirt. They deployed the same VM without changes to vCPU model, and they immediately got a 3x increase or 300% increase from 2 gig per second to 6 gig per second. What this did is it allowed them to realize a savings, because that network appliance that they were using had a per vCPU cost, and they either had a 2 vCPU model or a 4 vCPU model. When they migrated to Platform 9 and KubeVirt, they immediately saw this increased throughput with their environment that they were using from their environment. And because of that, they're now able to, instead of deploying the 4 vCPU appliance, which has a higher cost to them, they're able to move it down to that. So an upgraded networking stack, an upgraded DPDK path, upgraded KVM environment, all allowed them to see these this throughput gain, and it's saving them tons of money in their appliances. So do I think it's worth looking at? I think you should absolutely consider it. Another answer to that is, I think a lot of people, engineers, they want to play with and they want to learn new technologies, and it could help engineering leadership with retention of employees as they're moving into Kubernetes and KubeVirt and putting that stuff on their resume. I think that's a side tangible, but I think it's also applicable.
Yeah, one other mention kind of around this same question, right? Should I do this if I only have VMs? I think an important thing to point out as well is when you start to adopt an alternative platform, whether this is another cloud provider or another virtualization provider, you give yourself a much stronger hand in a negotiating position. Just consider going to your vendor and say, I have options. That really helps you out in driving down costs, even if you're not in a position where you've completely moved over to the other platform. You're putting yourself in a better position over time.
Right. So keep those questions coming. There's another one here. I think Peter already answered this. Performance with KubeVirt, right, compared to VMware. We already saw that example that Peter gave. I guess another question is, do I need to buy new hardware in order to move to this new platform?
I can lead out there. No,
yeah.
This will run on your standard Dell and HP servers and a number of others that are out there. So if you do have some servers that are running VMware or another legacy platform on them, you can repurpose them over to this environment.
Right. Which brings up the corollary question here. If I have a whole bunch of existing VMs can I migrate them over to this platform? I think Peter kind of answered it, but what does it take? I mean, if I have 1,000 VMs, Peter, for example, if I'm a big enterprise, got all these old VMs, monolithic apps lying around, what does it
Yep.
take to migrate to KubeVirt?
Yeah, so Platform 9 has an expert services group that we can engage for this process, right? Most of our customers tend to want to be taught to fish and understand the process and migrate the VMs at their own at their own rate when they have downtime and availability and things like that. But in addition to that, we have the expert services that can do the migration for you. But KubeVirt at a high level has an excellent import component built into it, which allows you stop a VM, you move the data over, and then you basically start it inside of KubeVirt. It's a very simplified process, and it's something that we like to teach our customers to understand how to do, so they're enabled to do that themselves. So yeah, it's a very simple, very easy process with the CDI.
Yeah. So the other question again is, let's say someone already has, and here's a question that just came through. We are currently extensively using Kubernetes clusters along with a few on-prem servers. How does KubeVirt help in this regard?
I think, oh, sorry, did you point it to Peter? I can.
Go ahead.
Anyone, yeah.
Okay. The thing I'll mention is what KubeVirt allows you to do is bring more workloads to your platform, right? You're constrained to just do containers right now. Bringing in KubeVirt allows you to get more value out of the platform there. And there again, right? Migrate at your own pace or refactor at your own pace as needed or as worthwhile. Going back to just measuring the level of effort that you'd want to spend on that.
Yeah, another way to answer that is, I'm assuming if you're running Kubernetes clusters already, the assumption there is you're running containers today, some workloads that are running containers. And you probably also have a VMware stack running in parallel or separately. Now, this is your opportunity to move those VMs over to run them on Kubernetes and literally reduce the cost of running VMware licenses, right? Because you already have the underlying infrastructure for running VMs and containers on the same stack. So that would be another way of looking at it, reducing costs, reducing the overhead of running two different stacks, one for VMware and one for Kubernetes, and bring it all together in one single management pane, if you will. Let's see, another question coming through. My next question is that, can we mix different models of hardware and still avail high availability?
Yes, so you can. So a couple of different examples here. That one customer that I was telling you about that got the 3x gains, right? They were leveraging specific hardware at the network card level, right, that supported DPDK. And they had some servers that were DPDK enabled, right, with a higher end network interface card, NIC, and some that had a lower, a different NIC that didn't support DPDK. And so in this single Kubernetes cluster, they were able to deploy and create some affinity rules that applications that were required to be deployed that required DPDK for the higher throughput could be scheduled on the appropriate nodes, right? And the ones that didn't were scheduled on the other nodes that didn't support DPDK. Another good example of this is graphic cards, right? A lot of people are doing data analytics and machine learning and AI, ML, right? All that sort of stuff. And they want to use CUDA cores out of graphics cards. They want to be able to assign those to pods to be able to use those, that sort of thing. And so you want to make sure that those hardware environments that have those expensive graphics cards are being well used, and that you schedule the appropriate workloads in there. So you can have clusters with different types of hardware associated with them, and then schedule workloads appropriately.
Right. One more question here around, so we're considering two different scenarios here. One is where you're 100% VM shop, running VMware, and you want to move to an alternative, modernize your infrastructure, move to a more cloud native environment. And the other is where you're already running containers, and you maybe have a group that's doing that already. So I guess the question here is around skills, right? We know that this is a challenge in the market today. It's very hard to find Kubernetes expertise, for example. Or if you're a VMware administrator, I mean, I'm pretty sure, Peter, you were mentioning this yesterday. This is a hard skill. I mean, everybody wants to learn these new technologies. It's good on the resume. Can you add some more color on what does it mean for an existing administrator to learn these new skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think virtual machine management and the concepts around virtual machine management, whether you're using OpenStack or VMware or KubeVirt, are all this similar. You have a base image, you're going to boot that image, you're going to have volumes attached, you're going to attach to network different networks, right? And you're going to have these things running for that virtual machine. You're going to be able to start them, stop them, pause them. You're going to be able to console access into them. All these kind of things that are activities that the day-to-day VM administrator will want to use. And if you take that and apply it to KubeVirt, the concepts are all there, right? And the Platform 9 UI supports everything that you're going to want to do. You're going to click different things, but that's an easy and a quick learning process for administrators who are familiar with virtual machine management. And so I think adopting this would happen very quickly.
Right.
Yeah. A thing I want to mention there too is it's nice that you can leverage skills from two teams now. Normally you've got kind of the Kubernetes and Linux team, and you've got the VMware and Windows team. You know, the lines aren't necessarily drawn that stark, but this helps two teams come together and leverage a common platform. And there again, you know, we talked about the management time savings, the operations time savings, I'll just say it, cooler and more exciting things higher up the stack and getting more value out of the platform because you do have that freed up operations time.
And DevOps automation and the ability to run CI/CD pipelines, and many of the administrators want to move up the value chain, right? Being able to help their engineering teams build their software and get it out there faster, for example, right? Rather than kind of getting stuck in the infrastructure management piece. We're kind of getting to the end of our session here. I'm just seeing one more question here. From an end user perspective, I guess end users in this case would be somebody that's using the actual application, or it could be an engineer or a developer. Will they see any difference when they move to this new platform? Peter?
The end user being the person that wants to create and manage his own self-service access for the lifecycle of virtual machines, right? We have the concept of a self-service user inside of Platform 9. They will have the ability to create and manage virtual machines within Platform 9, and it could be all self-service. So I think from their perspective, it's hitting one UI versus hitting another.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is if you get your tool chains tied in to KubeVirt, you know, very similar model to possibly how you're using VMware today. And if you're, you know, end users / developers are interacting with the environment in that manner, they'll just continue to use the same platform engineering tools that they are today. And that's something that we can help you with as well when we're architecting an environment, talking about how you can integrate your existing tool sets as well. So I won't say this is just going to snap in, but this is something that you can definitely integrate with the existing tools that you have.
Yeah, kind of agnostic to your environment, right? We can work with what you have. And that's kind of also an advantage when you're in the open source ecosystem, right? Versus a proprietary vendor where you're kind of getting stuck in their ecosystem in a way, right? I mean, it's your choice. At the end of the day, customers make the decision one way or the other, but this is all about being open, being agnostic, being able to move with the new pace that's happening out there in the industry and the open source community, and so on. And that brings us to the end of our session here. As I mentioned earlier, you feel free to reach out. You know, we were focusing this webinar on why you should consider an alternative, what the challenges are, and what the cost benefits are, what the business case is. But if you want to see the product in action, feel free to reach out and, platform9.com/talk to our experts. We can show you the product in action. You can see the UI. It's a modern UI. It's very easy to use. For VMware administrators, it should be a breeze as far as managing their VMs is concerned. And of course, if you want a business level conversation around cost savings and our TCO model, we can do that too. So feel free to reach out. That's our URL there. And certainly we'll have this recorded. We'll send it out to people that have attended and those who have registered. Really wish to thank you all for joining us today, and to our speakers today for sharing their insights and helping you make some good decisions for your infrastructure and modernization as you move forward with your journey here. Anything to add as we end up here, Peter and Nate?
That's all for me. Thanks. This has been great.
I'll just mention, appreciate the questions and the folks that joined us for the session. As Kamesh mentioned, this is the link where you can talk to us, but you'll be able to get to myself, Peter, and Kamesh directly. Happy to connect with you over email too and continue the conversation.
Thank you all. Appreciate your time, and it was fun talking about this stuff, and hope to see you again in another webinar in the future. Thank you and have a great day.